to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. The Philippines and the United Kingdom have inked a 5-year deal to strengthen their defense ties with a focus on maritime security in the Indo-Pacific, and this move comes amid rising tensions in the region. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan downplayed concerns of a trade war with China after imposing restrictions on advanced chip technology. He stressed the specific focus of these curbs despite veiled criticisms from Beijing. Thousands of jeepney drivers in Manila took to the streets, honking their horns in protest against the government's plan to phase out their vehicles. The air was thick with discontent as drivers voiced their concerns about livelihoods and transportation options. The Philippines and the United Kingdom have inked a deal to strengthen their defense cooperation over the next 5 years, with a key focus on maritime security in the Indo-Pacific region. Signed on January 11, the Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, outlines plans for joint military exercises, training programs, and potential equipment upgrades for the Philippine Armed Forces. Philippine Ambassador Teodoro Locsin Jr. signed for the Philippine side, while the Earl of Minto, Timothy Minto, Minister of State for Defense, signed for the UK side. This agreement is a major step forward in our defense partnership with the Philippines, according to the UK Embassy in Manila. We expect to collaborate on maritime security, protecting the exclusive economic zone, and participating in future military exercises. The MOU also opens doors for broader cooperation in areas like peacekeeping, disaster relief, and defense technology research. This move follows a joint statement signed by both nations in August 2023, emphasizing their commitment to upholding the rules-based international order and promoting a free and open maritime order in accordance with international law. The Philippines and the UK share concerns about China's growing assertiveness in the South China Sea, and this new partnership signals their intent to work together to maintain regional stability. A Korean Air passenger jet contacted an empty Cathay Pacific plane while taxiing at a snow-covered airport in Japan, causing minor damage but thankfully no injuries. And this incident comes just 2 weeks after a near-tragic collision at another Japanese airport. The incident occurred at New Chitose Airport, serving the northern city of Sapporo. Cathay Pacific confirmed their parked plane, with no passengers or crew on board, was struck by a taxiing Korean Air A330. Korean Air confirmed the 276 passengers and 13 crew on their plane bound for Seoul were unharmed. They attributed the incident to a ground handler vehicle slipping due to heavy snowfall, while both airlines declined to specify the extent of the damage. Footage showed a broken wing tip on the Korean airplane and damage to the rear of the Cathay Pacific aircraft. Authorities are now investigating the cause of the incident, and this event raises concerns following the January 2nd near miss at Tokyo's Haneda Airport, where a Japan Airlines plane narrowly avoided colliding with a Coast Guard aircraft, resulting in 5 fatalities in response. The Japanese government has implemented stricter air traffic control protocols nationwide, with 2 incidents in quick succession. Restoring public confidence in air travel safety remains a top priority for Japanese authorities. Further investigations and potential safety improvements are now underway. The United States is downplaying concerns that its restrictions on advanced chip technology to China will spark a trade war. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan addressed the issue at the World Economic Forum in Davos, following veiled criticisms from Beijing. Earlier, Chinese Premier Li Qiang had criticized discriminatory trade barriers at the forum, seen as a direct response to the U.S. chips curbs.
New discriminatory trade and investment measures worldwide. to the tune of 5,400, nearly doubling the number before the pandemic, before 2019. As we all know, industrial and supply chains in the economy are like the circulatory system of the human body. Any obstacles or disruptions can slow down or block the flow of lifeblood of the world economy, which not only compromises development efficiency, but also triggers various economic risks and economic problems. What truly serves common interests of all is to fully respect the laws of international industrial specialization, firmly advance trade and investment liberalization and facilitation, tighten the bond of cooperation, make the pie of mutual benefit bigger, and steadily enhance the stability of global industrial and supply chains.
Sullivan emphasized that the restrictions have a specific focus.
Today, military advantage hinges on access to critical technologies, some of which are commercial and dual use, like advanced semiconductors. Simply put, our strategic competitors should not be able to exploit American technologies to undermine our national security or that of our allies and partners. To deal with this, we've taken steps to regulate specific outbound investments of concern in technology, and we've implemented carefully tailored restrictions on exports, focused on advanced semiconductor manufacturing tools, supercomputing capabilities, and the most advanced chips, which are critical to a range of military platforms, including weapons of mass destruction, hypersonic missiles, and autonomous weapon systems. Key allies and partners have followed suit, acting on their own concerns. Now, I want to be clear. These tailored measures are not a technology blockade. They do not seek to, nor in fact do they, restrict broader trade and investment. And in fact, in our semiconductor rule that we put out just a few months ago, last October, there is a broad carve-out for commercial chips, the kind of chips that can help power economic progress and growth.
At the World Economic Forum in Davos, the topic of China's growing influence and its relationship with the West took center stage. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg responded to Senator Kuhn's remarks about the U.S.-China relationship and outlined NATO's perspective on China. Stoltenberg emphasized that NATO doesn't seek to expand into Asia, but rather to address the growing presence of China in areas like Africa and the Arctic.
So first of all, you are right that NATO is a transatlantic alliance, Europe and North America, and we will remain a regional alliance. But the transatlantic region faces global threats. Security is not longer regional, security is global. So what happens in Asia matters for Europe, and what happens in Europe matters for Asia. And therefore, of course, we don't regard China as an adversary, but China's heavy investments in modern military capabilities, including more and more advanced nuclear weapons, China's way of behavior, especially in the South China Sea, and the way China is actually violating core principles for NATO, democracy, the rule of law, journalism, freedom of expression, as we have seen in Hong Kong, all of that matters for NATO. And we also have to understand that this is not about NATO moving into Asia, but it's about the fact that China is coming closer to us. We see them in Africa, we see them in the Arctic.
He also highlighted the importance of controlling critical infrastructure, citing the example of 5G technology.
We see them trying to control a critical infrastructure. Not so many years ago, I had a big discussion about 5G. And many allies said this is only a commercial issue. No, it's also an issue about our security. So therefore, for all these reasons, of course, NATO has to address what happens in Asia, not because we are a global security alliance, but because what happens there matters for us, and vice versa. I visited Japan, South Korea, close partners of NATO. They are concerned about what happens in Ukraine because they know that the more success Putin has in Ukraine, the more likely it is that Beijing will use force. So we have to have a global approach, even though we are regional countries, regional organizations. The world is interconnected, and of course NATO has taken the consequence of that.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the World Economic Forum in Davos today, placing blame for ongoing global conflicts squarely on the shoulders of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Zelensky called Putin the sole reason for persisting wars and failed peace efforts, a stark accusation delivered as the invasion of Ukraine approaches its 2-year anniversary. Thomas I. Likeness reports.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky courted the global elite in Davos on Tuesday. His speech contained a mix of dire warnings and notes of hope as fears grow over the future of Western support against Russia. Zelensky portrayed the Russian leader as a predator.
In fact, Putin embodies war. We all know that he is the sole reason why various wars and conflicts persist and why all attempts to restore peace have failed, and he will not change.
Zelensky urged Europe and the United States to continue their support for Ukraine's war effort. He says it's imperative that Putin is contained.
If anyone thinks this is only about us, this is only about Ukraine, they are fundamentally mistaken. Possible directions and even timeline of a new Russian aggression beyond Ukraine become more and more obvious.
As far as bringing the war to an end, Zelensky rejects the prospect of freezing the conflict with Russia. He says any frozen conflict will eventually reignite.
Putin is a predator who is not satisfied with the frozen products.
More than 2,500 kilometers away in the Kremlin, Putin retorted that Moscow's forces have the upper hand. And he says if the war continues, Ukraine's statehood could be dealt an irreparable, very serious blow.
Не только провалилось их контрнаступление, но инициатива полностью находится в руках российских вооруженных сил. Если так будет дальше продолжаться, украинской государственности может быть нанесен невосполнимый, очень серьезный удар.
He told a meeting of Russian municipal officials that he rejects Zelensky's peace proposals. He says they're just an attempt to encourage Russia to give up the gains it has made in the last year.
А что касается этого переговорного процесса, попытка побудить нас отказаться от тех завоеваний, которые мы реализовали за последние 1,5 года. Но это невозможно. Все понимают, что это невозможно. И они, правящие круги на Украине, понимают. И западные элиты понимают. Все понимают.
Putin also calls recent attacks on Russian civilians barbaric. He says they're being carried out on peaceful settlements with indiscriminate weapons. Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. The war triggered the West to hit Moscow with an unprecedented package of sanctions and provide billions of dollars in military and economic assistance to Kyiv. Thomas I. Likeness, Eagle News. We live in extraordinary times.
At the World Economic Forum in Davos, a key question was posed to NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. Is Russia truly aware of the devastating cost of its war in Ukraine? While acknowledging the reported figures, Stoltenberg cautioned against predictions about internal Russian dynamics.
The situation on the battlefield is extremely difficult. The Russians are now pushing on many front lines, and of course the big offensive that the Ukrainians launched last summer didn't give the results we all hoped for. And we see how Russia is now building up, how they are acquiring drones from Iran, actually building their own drone factory to produce their own drones in Tatarstan. I'm very careful predicting about both how the war will develop. Wars are by nature unpredictable, and I'm even more careful about predicting what will happen inside Russia. We saw progressing last year. Surprises may happen, but we don't have any indications or any big change inside Russia. But of course, there can be surprises.
However, Stoltenberg also emphasized the significant cost Russia is already paying for its aggression.
And of course, when they had lost 300,000 soldiers, casualties, thousands of armed vehicles, hundreds of planes, this is something that matters for Russia and for ordinary Russians. Their economy is struggling. They are paying a high economic price. They are paying a high political price. They are more politically isolated, also in the near abroad, in Caucasus and Central Asia.
He also stressed the importance of continuing to raise the price for Russia through military support for Ukraine.
And the paradox is that if we want that to happen, a peaceful, just end to this war, the way to get there is more weapons to Ukraine. So the more credible we are in our military support, the more likely it is that the diplomats will succeed. Because what happens around the negotiating table with diplomats is so closely linked to the situation on the battlefield.
Stoltenberg argues that a strong military stance by Ukraine's allies will ultimately force Russia to the negotiating table.
There are no indications that Putin is planning for peace now, but he will when he realizes that we will not give up, that we have the military strength to support Ukraine, and then he will sit down and the diplomats can take over.
American forces destroyed 4 Houthi anti-ship missiles in Yemen today, according to the U.S. military, confirming this amid ongoing attacks by the Iran-backed rebels, despite multiple airstrikes against them. And this marks the 3rd U.S. strike against the Houthis in less than a week, as the rebels continue targeting merchant vessels in the vital Red Sea shipping lane. They claim these attacks are in support of Palestinians in Gaza, where Israel is battling Hamas. U.S. forces struck and destroyed 4 Houthi anti-ship ballistic missiles. These missiles presented an imminent threat to both merchant and U.S. Navy ships in the region, according to CENTCOM. Last week, the U.S. and Britain launched a joint strike on nearly 30 Houthi sites in Yemen. The Houthis, in turn, have declared U.S. and British interests legitimate targets and continue their attacks on Red Sea ships. While seeking de-escalation, the U.S. set up a naval task force last month to protect Red Sea shipping from the Houthis. And this crucial trade route carries up to 12% of global trade. Despite its military actions, the U.S., through National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, has reiterated its desire for de-escalation in the Middle East.
We've also worked to rally an international response to new aggression in the Middle East. In the Red Sea, reckless attacks by the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels, including the use of anti-ship ballistic missiles, have threatened freedom of navigation in one of the world's most vital waterways. More than 50 nations have been affected in nearly 30 attacks. Last week, the United States and the United Kingdom, with support from Australia, Bahrain, Canada, and the Netherlands, struck a number of targets in Yemen used by the Houthis to stage and launch these attacks. This defensive action followed extensive multinational coordination led by the United States among 44 nations to condemn Houthi attacks, and also led to a UN Security Council resolution condemning those attacks. We are not looking for regional conflict, far from it. Through a combination of steady deterrence and steadfast diplomacy, we seek to stop the spread of conflict and to create the conditions for de-escalation. Our approach is and remains focused on moving towards greater integration and stability in the region.
The air in Manila hummed with discontent, not from the usual traffic, but from a sea of honking jeepneys. In a noisy protest, thousands of drivers took to the streets, their colorful vehicles emblazoned with slogans against the government's plan to phase them out. For over 7 decades, these iconic remodeled jeeps have served as the lifeblood of Filipino transportation, ferrying millions for mere pesos. But the government says their smoke-belching engines are a major contributor to pollution, and they must be replaced with modern minibuses.
Laban po namin yung karapatan namin mabuhay sa prangkisa po namin na 5 years. Sana maibalik na po.
The plan launched in 2017 has faced numerous delays. Now, with the deadline looming, drivers fear joining mandated cooperatives and buying new vehicles will plunge them into debt.
Pag pinalitan ko po yun, tulad ng mga modernized jeep ngayon, sobra mahal. Magkakautang pa ako ng gayong kamahal, gayong kalaki. Samantala ako may jeep na patapos ng bayaran. Ibig sabihin mo, wala na ako ng utang tapos ngayon, eto na naman.
Sa totoo lang, minsan di na makatulog eh. Sa kaiisip eh, lalo na itong papalapit na yung pizza, ilang araw na lang. So, lagi na lang ako nagmumuni-muni sa bahay na parang halos umiyak na nga ako dun eh. Tatago nga lang ako sa kwarto ko para hindi ako makita ng mga anak ko eh. Kasi mga anak ko, alam ko may iyak din sila eh. Pagka nakita nila ako nagluluha-luha sa kaiisip.
Danes will no longer be able to adopt children from abroad, including from the Philippines, as the country's only adoption agency shuts down. The Danish International Adoption, or DIA, agency announced its closure, citing irregularities in employment regulations in the 6 countries it currently works with, including the Philippines. And this follows the Danish Social Affairs Ministry's suspension of adoption from these countries. And this news comes after a series of concerning reports, including possible fraud in Madagascar and illegal adoptions in the Philippines, Thailand, and Taiwan. DIA, unable to continue operating under the current conditions, has no choice but to close its doors. And this leaves 36 ongoing adoption procedures in limbo, and it's unclear what will happen to these families. International adoptions in Denmark have already seen a dramatic decline in recent years, dropping from 418 in 2010 to a mere fraction of that number today. Similar concerns have also led Norway to take action. Their Directorate for Children, Youth and Family Affairs, or BUFDIR, has halted all adoptions from the Philippines, Taiwan, and Thailand following similar cases of illegal adoptions. Additionally, new adoption procedures from South Korea are no longer allowed as of January. BUFDIR originally proposed a 2-year freeze on all international adoptions while an investigation is conducted, but the government opted for a quicker evaluation instead. Finally, in our news, as 2023 confirms itself as the hottest year on record, Kaveh Zahedi, head of the climate division at the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, sees a silver lining in agriculture.
We mustn't become numb to these records after records toppling, because they have implications in terms of increased frequency of extreme weather events, implications in terms of more forest fires, in terms of droughts, floods, etc. And all of these are impacting people, especially those on the front lines like the agricultural communities. So these records matter. Now, we need to react to it. We can't just be sort of passive observers of a changing climate, and agriculture has a central role to play.
While agriculture contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, Zahedi believes it also holds immense potential for climate action. Sustainable and efficient farming practices can offer solutions for adaptation and emissions reduction, while ensuring food security for all.
These are solutions that agriculture and food systems can offer that can, yes, help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at the same time as building resilience and improving adaptation capabilities, at the same time as addressing food security challenges. We know still that over 700 million people are food insecure.
Zahedi emphasizes the role of sustainable agriculture in achieving net zero emissions and even generating renewable energy.
Farms don't just have to be producers of food, they can be generators of renewable energy. Energy that can then be used on the farm for the greenhouses, for pumping water, for irrigation, or energy that can be shared into the grid, or better using agricultural waste, turning it into fuels, into biofuels. All of these are really energy-smart agriculture solutions, and that's exactly the kind of work that we've been doing with countries.
FAO is actively working with countries to implement these solutions. One successful program in partnership with the Global Environment Facility has already helped over 120 countries with projects delivering environmental benefits.
almost $1.5 billion has been accessed. And that funding has been specifically to put into action these solutions, to bring land and sea under sustainable management. And just that portfolio has given extraordinarily dividends. We have over, I think it's 100 million hectares of land under sustainable management. That's helped to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by over 500 million tons, and is bringing real benefits in terms of green jobs and livelihoods.
With climate change threatening up to 10% of land used for major crops and livestock, the UN Climate Conference, or COP28, saw 159 leaders endorse a declaration on sustainable agriculture. FAO's climate change strategy and global roadmap aim to eradicate hunger within the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit set by the Paris Agreement. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angela. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.